Hello, welcome everyone. We are really excited for you all to be with us today. We will jump into the webinar. I know people are continuing to trickle in, but we'll go ahead and get started. I will hand it over to Dr. Christie to do some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome to everyone. We're so glad to have you with us today. We are excited to get into our third event of our learning series, Engaging Youth in Policy Advocacy and Governance. And to kick off our session, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Maura Berry, who is the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. She also serves as the interim USAID Global Water Coordinator. So Ms. Berry has extensive responsibilities for all of the project areas that we are covering today, looking at their agricultural-led economic growth portfolio, looking at resilience, nutrition, water security, sanitation, and hygiene. And so we are thrilled to have her today. She's got a wealth of experience across regions with USAID, with other agencies, and she has been a big supporter of our efforts so far, and we're so pleased to have her here today. So Maura.
Thank you, Dr. Christie Allison, very much. And it's a pleasure to be here today and have the honor of kicking off this event. And I really look forward to hearing from all our panelists on what I know is going to be an exciting conversation. It's so important. You know, I know we all get frustrated with how many Zoom calls we've been on during the last 18 months, but the beauty of it is we can bring such a diverse group of us all together, right? We have people from across the globe sitting on our panel and joining this call. So I just find that really inspiring and exciting. And of course, the topic of engaging youth in policy, advocacy, and governance is so important. We know that the energy and the vitality and all of the innovation that youth bring into decision-making, into the workforce, it's so important. As Dr. Allison was saying, you know, I work for USAID. I've spent most of my career working in different parts of different regions. I spent a lot of time in East Africa, working in Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, Burundi. I spent time in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka, as well as in the regional office that USAID has in Bangkok. My last assignment was in Jamaica. And the reason I share all of that with you is because wherever I've gone, some of the work that USAID has done that I have found the most rewarding and impactful has been the work that we've done that focuses on engaging youth in decision-making. And of course, today we're talking very much about food security at such an opportune time with the UN Food Systems Summit just around the corner, finding opportunities to really give voice, and all the work that all of you are doing around that space is so important. So thank you for setting aside the time for this discussion, for us to learn from each other about how to be more innovative in our programming. I think we're all aware that the work that we do as development agencies is in countries where the median age of the population is less than 20 years. We also know that, you know, we have a lot of new folks joining the workforce. We expect 14 million people to join the workforce each year. And we also know that in developing countries, the part of the workforce that is most impactful for pulling countries up out of poverty is that in the agricultural sector, in food systems. You know, research shows us that investments in agriculture can be 4 times more impactful than investments in other sectors in terms of helping lift lower income countries out of poverty. So really important space to be engaging with the population, particularly youth, right? So I'm going to leave it at there with my remarks. Really, my job was just to sort of kick it off. And as I said, I look forward to hearing from all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. So back to you, Dr. Allison.
Thank you, Maura. And Jane Buikizuka, we'd like to invite you. Jane is the youth advisor for the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. And we'd like to invite Jane to give us all a little bit of a rundown on how we got to where we are today.
Thank you very much, Christy, and thank you so much again, Maura, for your kicking us off today and being such a supporter of young people and this work in relation to RFS's areas of work, and to all of you from around the world for joining in today. Great thanks too to GKI, our fantastic implementation team at Making Sense International, and our amazing reference group member, Dr. Brennan, who has assembled just an incredible group of people to be with us today. So I have been starting each one of the series with a little bit of background on the learning activity. It's called the Youth and Agri-food Systems Learning Activity that RFS, that's the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security of USAID, has been implementing about less than a year at this point. USAID has worked with youth over many decades, but over the past 10 years, especially as guided by the Global Food Security Strategy and the USAID Youth and Development Policy, among others, we have made substantial investments in programs and policies that support youth contributions to food security, nutrition, resilience. But a couple of years ago, the precursor to Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation, known as Youth Power, did a review of learning, and it did note significant gaps in evidence for work in these particular areas. So whilst there has been quite a lot of consensus on why to work with young people, a lot of questions were remaining on how best to do so in diverse contexts. So at all phases of the program cycle, mission teams and partners, including young people, need to know more about how best to effectively engage youth as drivers of change and resilience in agri-food systems, especially in ways that benefit both sustainable systems and youth. So the learning activity aims to advance knowledge on approaches to and the state of evidence for youth inclusion in international development interventions related to agri-food systems, and specifically in the areas of ag-led growth, food security, resilience, nutrition, water security, sanitation, and hygiene. So we have been tracking strategies, mapping pathways, and beginning now to gauge the state of the evidence for youth contributions to their country's development objectives in these areas. So through this process, we will identify areas for further research and also engage stakeholders, and we hope all of you out there around the world in using the existing evidence better. And that's why we're here today. I am very excited for the content of this session. I'm often asked if I could sum it up in 10 seconds, what would I say about how best to work with young people? And my answer is often engage, engage, engage. And so, this is about why when it comes to advocacy, policy, and I will turn it back to you, Christy, for the next steps.
Great. So to elaborate on what Jane said, we just wanted to do a little more setting of the stage. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So we essentially undertook two important explorations of pathways, as Jane mentioned. One was looking really at an inventory of programmatic efforts. Another was looking at the metrics that were used in those programs. And what we found, as you'll see on the next slide in the inventory, was within the different programming areas that the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security leads, there were a number of key approaches that we identified for their programming areas. And within those, two of them, resilience and ag-led economic growth, had youth-specific approaches. And nutrition did too, to some extent, but these were where the majority of the programs lined up in their youth-specific approaches. And we did identify, gender-sensitive interventions that were becoming more common. But one of the challenges we identified was that there was little attention to the intersectionality of gender and youth, or of youth and a range of other vulnerability factors. We also found that data were limited and often incomparable due to extensive changes in indicators over the past 10 years and inconsistent reporting on some of the required indicators. We also found that youth projects were targeted on supply side solutions, and there weren't a lot of systems approaches to addressing youth challenges. And that led us to think we have some questions that we want to look at in the policy advocacy and governance arena, as well as others. So we then proceeded to explore the evidence base further, and we did that by establishing a reference group with Dr. Brennan and several other individuals representing different academic and practitioner communities. And we completed a literature review using 5 lenses on youth development: biophysical, psychosocial, sociocultural, and socioecological, economics, and policy and governance. And as we went through the evidence and married that with what we had from the lit review, what we were finding was we wanted to find out what the evidence base was. Are we currently implementing it? If the evidence is positive and we're not doing it, that gives us another tool in the toolbox. If the evidence is negative and we are doing it, we want to try to revise those approaches. However, one of the challenges that we found was that there were still a large number of unresolved issues. Our reference group selected some of those thorniest challenges and debates, and those are the ones we're focusing on in this learning series. So our goal for the series and for today is to explore the current evidence, to challenge it from multiple perspectives, both from academic disciplines and the experiences of those who've worked on these approaches on the ground. We also want to query the evidence from another perspective, that of USAID missions and staff who have to make decisions about programmatic approach, structure, and budget. What kinds of evidence do you have at your disposal when you have to make those decisions? And how do you ground truth that evidence in your context to the extent that you're able to do so at all? So we're excited to have everyone engaged today. We look forward to extending our learning, to eliciting your thoughts as we tackle these issues. And we appreciate you joining this third of our learning series. And so we'll hand it off to Mark to lead us into our discussion today.
Great, thanks so much, Christy. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone for being here. And special thanks to everyone that's already spoken, from USAID, from GKI, the Making Sense folks have been amazing, the Youth Power 2 initiative, and everyone else. This has really been an amazing initiative that brings together a really wide range of interests. And all of these interests, they really dramatically shape the opportunities for young people. That's the focus here. And in the context of rural development and agricultural development. But the one thing we do know from our work is that all of our agricultural advances and technology and everything else, they do little if they're not adopted and co-created by youth. So a youth voice is absolutely critical to achieving our goals for sustainability, for food security, and for a whole host of other things. So just as a quick introduction here, I'm Mark Brennan. I'm a professor for community and leadership development at Penn State University. I also am the UNESCO Chair for Community Leadership and Youth Development. And much of my work really centers around positive youth development, but with a particular focus on efforts that ensure youth voice in programs, policy, and decision-making that affect them in their home places, but also more globally. And a large amount of this work is in rural areas, in agricultural communities. And the focus on community development and agricultural innovation around employment is key. And very often youth are at the forefront of this. And we'll talk a bit in a minute about why that's so important. But I want to start off with just, today we bring a really great mix of research, practice, experience, all kind of focusing on empowering youth from a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different backgrounds. So I wanted to just have the panel introduce themselves real quickly, just a minute or so, or not, just a sentence or two, and then they'll have full presentations coming up. But maybe we can just start with that. Maybe we can start with Pat Dolan. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, delighted to be here today. My name is Pat Dolan. I'm UNESCO Chair for Children, Youth and Civic Engagement at the National University of Ireland in Galway in the west of Ireland, with a particular interest in youth as researchers, empathy, and positive youth development.
Great, thanks, Pat. Sue Bies.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Bies. I work for UNESCO in the regional office in Bangkok in Asia Pacific. I'm a youth specialist and I coordinate the youth activities for UNESCO And I'm lucky enough to work with the chairs, Mark and Pat, who you've just met. So nice to meet everybody today.
Great, thank you. So, Kayla.
Hi everyone, I'm Kayla Thorne. I work with everyone who's spoken so far with the UNESCO Youth as Researchers project. I have a focus in youth and community development and a real passion for positive youth development and youth voice.
Great, thank you. Lillian, sorry.
No worries. Hi, my name is Lillian. I'm a rising sophomore and I was a participant of the UNESCO Youth as Researchers program. Super excited to be here.
Great, thank you so much. Simon.
Yes, I'm Simon Jiziwa from Malawi. I'm a lecturer in adolescent psychology. I have a strong interest in youth issues and I do develop a curriculum for the out-of-school youth. I'm the coordinator of UNESCO chair in the University of Malawi. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And Gina.
Hi everyone, I'm Gina Lontok from the College of Education and the Graduate School of the University of Santo Tomas in Manila, Philippines. So I'm also part of the UNESCO Chair in Adult Literacy program in the Philippines. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much everyone. You'll be hearing a lot more from all of these folks, some amazing work and experience and practice. How's it looking for our polls there? Do we have any results yet? So let's take a look at these quick. And these, you can keep adding to these after we give away the answers. But some interesting things here. The first one here, and I'll talk about all these in a second. The numbers here look really good. The correct answer to the first one is currently D. More than half the planet now is under age 25. It's about 52, 53%. The really cool thing about that is that number is growing. It's not just some little blip or demographic change. It's a long-term thing. And we're here for 2 hours, and by the end of this, there'll be a net increase of about 4,000 youth. So the number's going up. Where do youth live? All over the place. There are a large number in urban areas, but the vast majority are in rural areas. And rural areas that are largely dependent on agriculture and are also the source for where a lot of food and everything else is coming from. And in the last one, everybody got that right, all of the above. A lot of the work that all of us here do, focuses on youth and their voice in many ways. But in many settings, historically and in the present, youth voice is often ignored. Youth are treated as adults in waiting, and they're not there. But if we actually look back historically, most of our efforts towards improving the human condition, through everything from food security to human rights to civil rights to everything else, has largely been youth driven. And we'll talk about some of the reasons there, but that's great stuff there. So a few things here. So as I mentioned, as we look at youth around the world, I think it's key for us to reflect on this and think about this, that they're not the future, they are the present. As we just said here, more than half the planet is under 25. And the really amazing thing that I think is amazing about these folks and that we have to engage and embrace is that they're on the ground every day. They know the realities of life better than most of us that aren't on the ground as much as we used to be. We're stuck in our offices, we're stuck wherever we are. They're also much, much more in tune with what can and should be done. They realize the nuances of our world, of our resources, of all sorts of other things. And it's smart for us as program and policy people to engage them fully in this program and policy and planning process. And it's really to our detriment if we don't. And the other thing here is, as we talked about in our poll there, these youth are everywhere. And the highest numbers are in rural agricultural areas. And you can see some of the slides that are popping up here. These are just the average age of the population. Now there's youth everywhere. There's large numbers everywhere. But this gives you a feel for some of how this lays out. So that's Europe. You can see North America here. Overall pretty older population. South America, we're seeing increasing numbers of youth, but still, a little older here and there. We can go on to the next one. As we get into the LAC region and Central America, the Caribbean, increasingly younger populations. As we move on here, as we get to different parts of Asia and the Pacific, large blocks of young people. And as we go on to, Middle East, Central Asia, very young populations. People often don't think about this region as being so young. It's incredibly young. If we can go on, this is my favorite. This is the average age in Africa. This is an entire continent of young people. Absolutely amazing. As was mentioned before, the average age in lots of the places all of us do work, is in the teens. So that gives you a feel for how big the youth population is, and there's the whole thing put together. You can see overall there's just a broad swath of the world that is just incredibly young, incredibly eager to be engaged, and in terms of implementing and delivering and creating programs and policies and initiatives and jobs and everything else. That's what they've done historically, and that's really, I think, an important thing for us to think about. So as you can see there, the implications for engaging this youth population is just massive. It's massive in terms of food production and food security. It's massive in terms of youth economic stability and individual security. And it's also just absolutely critical to well-being across the lifespan, from youth to the elderly to all people in between. This population of young people is the driving force that will ensure all of those things. So it's incredibly critical that we get their voices, and not that we just listen to their voices, that we actually use what they have to say, that we actually give them some ownership in creating new jobs, creating new ways for development, creating new ways for us to deal with each other. Now, the last thing I'll say there, it goes back to our poll, is the role of youth in positive social change. And if we look back historically across the world, historically, youth have been at the forefront of innovation, social justice, equality, gender equity, and positive societal development. And in countless ways, they've historically advanced the human condition. And this is fact. This is not just wishful thinking. If you go back and look at any of our social movements, any of our major advances, young people were at the forefront of all these things. So it's critical that we engage them here as we talk about ways to ensure food security, individual well-being, a whole host of other things. And if we do that, we're all going to be better off for it. This is where some of the great innovation and creativity and everything else comes from. Not to mention some very accurate information that they provide, because they're living their daily existences in places that we may not be aware of the conditions. So with that, I'd like to now is just move our discussions onto some really amazing people that just introduce themselves. So what I'd like to do is start with Pat Dolan. Pat has spent much of his career working with youth and ensuring their voice, ensuring that they have ownership. And he's done an awful lot of research and practice work that shows that the idea of giving youth serious and significant voice is not just a tokenistic gesture, that the outcomes are amazing. So with that, I'll hand it over to Pat. You can talk a bit, Pat, about your work, and we can chat a little bit more.
Great. Thanks very much, Mark. And really delighted again to say that I'm here and to be with you. I suppose from my perspective, there will be kind of three core aspects that I think are as relevant today to this event. The first one is around youth voice, and with Mark and Kayla and Sue and other colleagues across UNESCO, we've been working very steadily on the development of youth as researchers. And that was started in Ireland in a very humble beginning. And it really started with the whole notion that young people could be and are excellent researchers themselves. So what we've done, we started with and we do is we train young people to be researchers. They learn things like bias, they learn, qualitative, quantitative methodologies, they learn sampling, they learn, ethical approval and so forth, like any researcher does. But the really powerful thing is that they then lead and do the research with other youth. And this has been, for me, one of the most transformational things in my career to be involved in. It's been sensational. And we used, and it's interesting that youth very quickly use a very pluralist approach to what is evidence. What I really like about it is the fact that under Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Children and Youth, we talk about the importance of participation of young people. and for the benefit of civic society and so forth. Well, here's a real tangible way that you get participation with young people where they use their voice. Of course, the most important thing is that it's heard, that the evidence is heard in terms of the research they produce, and most importantly, it's disseminated and acted on in policy. So I think it's voice, heard, and acting on are the three ingredients that I see as key. And I'm going to give you one example of from a very early Youth as Researchers program that we started in Ireland in an area of West Dublin called Tala, where there were young people who were basically the recipients of homophobic bullying in a disadvantaged community. And a group of LGBTQI youth approached our centre, and we worked with them and trained them as youth researchers. And they did research on the community in 5 school districts around attitudes to homophobia. And it led to them creating a brilliant research video, not a research report that no one would read, because nobody reads research reports, let's be honest, but a really excellent research video, which our patron Cillian Murphy, the Irish actor, narrated. And that was used as a tool to advocate for more tolerance and empathy among youth in schools in that area of Dublin and afterwards across Ireland. And the great thing about that piece of research was it reduced homophobic bullying massively over a 5-year period in that area of Dublin. A small example, but from that little acorn has grown a worldwide Youth as Researchers project. The reason I'm highlighting that is that I have not a concern, but I think that in order for youth voice to be impactful, we have to come up with really tangible means and ways that we can do that. And I think Youth as Researchers is one example. The key factor in it for me, though, is that it's not just about focusing on marginalized youth. It's about a collaboration. It's about the mainstream of youth populations having their voice heard in collaboration with those that are marginalized. And I really like that ecological approach, or that ecological framework as a way of thinking about that. And that includes everybody right through to government actors, to politicians, policymakers. But there is a large onus on the academic community, putting it very bluntly, to live in the real world of young people a bit more. And a great example I can give of that is if we think of Malawi Yousafzai and her advocacy work around Pakistan, or we think of other youths that have been amazing, not least Greta Thunberg, that really has taught us so much about environmental safety. So allowing young people the space to do what they can do very well is a key function for me and for the work I do. And I know I don't look youthful, but I like to behave in a youthful way. And in a way, I think one of the best ways I can do that is actually by stepping back and allowing young people have that light. The last thing I'd say at this point, which I think is really important, is about building up scale and capacity. So what I mean by that is that we need to think about what is the evidence that young people's voice can create. And that can be quantitative evidence, qualitative evidence. It can be a whole range of methodologies. It's not just, small qualitative research. It's a much wider menu of research that takes a pluralist approach to evidence. And what we value as evidence is really, really important. So I would challenge organizations like the World Bank to have a wider view of how they appreciate evidence, not least in terms of the idea of the rights of young people to be determinants of their own evidence of what impacts them in their own lives. And bringing that into the focus around resilience and overcoming the odds. And if we think of Anne Masson's real understanding of the term resilience, it's about thriving in the face of adversity. I think Youth as Researchers and the accompanying empathy education program, which Mark and I and others are very heavily involved within UNESCO and elsewhere, I think it offers a good opportunity as a platform of strong evidence that can contribute something here. So delighted to be here. I hope my remarks are of some use, and very happy to talk more.
That's brilliant, Pat. Thanks so much. I think, there's a couple of thoughts and questions I have, but even stepping back from that, one of the things I was really amazed with your work around the Youth as Researchers was that it aside from getting youth voice heard, it also creates a really valuable skill set. One of the things we've seen from this is that youth want to tell their story, and they embrace the whole art and craft of research, which sounds funny because most of us think it's kind of a boring sort of thing, but actually they realize the importance of that in terms of getting the message across. So the skill sets, the critical thinking, the passion they have for doing research, and then the responsibility they realize that they're telling other people's stories, and that's an amazing thing, is a major youth development skill as well. And the other thing I would mention too, and you mentioned this in passing, Pat, but I think one of the key things that's great about the work you've been doing is that youth choose the topics they study. They're not being dictated to and told to study certain things. And one of the examples that really hit home with me was one of the Youth as Researchers projects you did that was in a rural area, agricultural area, and me sitting in my office and knowing the place, I immediately went to job creation and entrepreneurship and everything else. And it wasn't until I was talking with the youth later on, and they said, no, we decided to study mental health. And I kind of scratched my head a little bit, and I said, okay, well, it's great, whatever you decide, but what's the story with that? And they very, very quickly and articulately explained to me that you can't even get to the stage of job creation, of entrepreneurship, all these things, unless we deal with the massive mental health issues we're facing in this locality. And they were very clear that this is a precursor to innovation and creativity. And so they were much more focused and astute than I would have been. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I would have been incredibly short-sighted. So I think there's really lots of different dimensions to this. It's just remarkable. But just following up on two things you said there, Pat, and I know we have to move on here, but I'm just curious what you think. How can we ensure that policymakers act on the messages of youth? One of the things, we've all seen this globally and everywhere else, that youth are often treated as adults in waiting, and they're to be seen and not heard, and this sort of thing. How do we get policymakers to actually act? What's been your experience or your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the powers of this, I mean, it has its limitations, so it's not, we need to say that as well. But one of the most powerful aspects of youth as research is the fact that, first of all, young people have a capacity to actually access, in many cases, better data than adults can, not least in peer-to-peer, one-to-one interviews and so forth, which is an obvious one, but also in terms of their capacity to understand and discern what data they're creating. And they have, as I say, in some cases better than adult researchers. I hate to say this one way, but in some cases better than adult researchers. They've been able to discern the messages and evidence, their findings, into real usable ways of thinking and doing. And to answer your question, I think one of the key ways that we've been successful with policymakers and city planners and politicians has been that because the youth have been so to the point and blunt in some cases, they've reduced it down to 4 or 5 things we can do that need to be done, for which they have produced evidence. And I think getting less is more, getting politicians to agree that they will act on one thing in 1 year is better than just putting a menu of so much in front of policymakers that it frightens them away. And also, the other thing I would say is that one thing we've learned, and I've learned, and I think it's a really good improvement in this, is that very often, sometimes we would assume as adults, as older adults, because youth are the researchers, it's a them and us situation. It's the youth against the older, it's the youth against the government. In fact, young people, my experience of youth as researchers has been the opposite. They look on collaborations and consortia. They look on ways that they can work with academics, teachers, educators, policymakers. So I think the other way is to really not think about it as a confrontational thing, but as a coalition. And the last thing I would say, and it probably is the most important aspect of this, is that it's my experience of youth as researchers has been that they have this great capacity to remain neutral when they need to remain neutral as researchers, but they also have the capacity to show compassion and to have compassion for things that are real in their lives and things that affect their lives and those of older people. And not least in Ireland, for example, the way young people have really stepped up to the plate in terms of concern for older people with COVID-19 and the way we've seen how that has happened. So I think it's a very positive message, and rather than anything we should be tentative about, I think it's something we really need to engage much more in. And Sue Weiss and others will attest to that.
No, that's great, Pat. And we'll move on here, but I think this work that you've initiated and started over the years has just been transformational, both to us as academics and practitioners, but also to the youth population. I mean, it's I think at last count, it's probably been done a couple hundred times globally, and we can move on to Sue Weiss now, who's been kind of guiding this process in response to COVID, where it's been done with 30 or 40 groups globally, and all of them immediately responding to the challenges and opportunities that they face. So, and I'm sure there'll be more questions coming back to you, Pat, but that was brilliant. Thanks. All right, maybe we can move on to Sue Weiss now. As I said, Sue has been at the forefront of dealing with youth voice and empowerment in lots of ways, but in no short example over the past 15, 16 months. We said to Sue, do you think we want to do a youth as researchers group or two, as the pandemic was starting? And within a week or two, we had 40 groups and 6,000 youth. So maybe Sue, you could tell us a bit about your work and your thoughts in this area, and then we can chat a bit more.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that the motivation of young people and the commitment of young people to be involved in things like this is amazing. And I think it's really demonstrated through the number of young people that really wanted to be involved in something like this. And in fact, one of the things we asked them to do to be part of this program was to write about their motivation to be involved. And I think it's really clear that the commitment that they have to improving their communities is very strong. So, and this was young people, I think the applications we had came from 80-something countries. So they're from all over the world, from all continents. And despite the fact that, we don't all have equal access, I think there's a lot of willingness and interest to be involved in initiatives like this everywhere. So I wanted to also make 3 points like Pat, so I'm following in Pat's footsteps. I think that there's a lot of evidence now that really demonstrates the value of participatory approaches and involving impacted stakeholders into all aspects of any kind of project, whether it's research, policy or planning. But I think particularly with what we're doing with the research, there's a few key points that I wanted to touch upon. And the first one is about how do we actually get this information that we're generating into policy, into practice? How do we get decision makers to listen to it? Very much what you just said before, Mark. And I think from my perspective, the first key point is opportunity. Making the connection between the policymakers and the youth. And this is sometimes where there is a gap. And this is where initiatives like Youth as Researchers or USAID or any other kinds of projects like this can help to bridge the gap and bring the policymakers and the young people together. Because without that opportunity, sometimes the information and the advocacy can be falling on deaf ears. You've got to make your research be heard or your messages be heard before people can act upon it. So I think one of the key things we need to look out for is what are those opportunities and how can we strengthen those opportunities? And for young people in rural areas, these can actually be even less because most of the policy makers, the decision makers, the big businesses are based in the cities. So the rural youth are often getting even less opportunity to reach out to or connect to these young people. So I think it's really important that a project like the USAID one creates those opportunities. And I think you can use media, you can use other advocacy skills, but you really need to think through how can you make those connections. And I think the second point is making sure that your policy message has a strong underpinning in evidence. And this is where the research skills in a program like Youth as Researchers can really make a difference, because we're starting off with, excuse me, I have something in my eye. We're starting off with a way to try to get young people to really think through what is the question or what is the issue they want to address, what is the evidence they need to be able to make their argument, and how do they collect and present that evidence. So youth as researchers is not just about doing the research, it's also about designing and presenting the research so that it goes right through from the issue to the solution. And then I think Pat also touched on my third point, and that is about collaboration. I think the power of young people working together really makes a difference from youth working in isolation, and bringing young people together from different social backgrounds, from different life experiences, not only strengthens the research and the quality of the information that they are able to put together, but the collaboration actually gives them a way to amplify their voice and ensure that their message has more opportunities to get out. So I think those are the 3 points I would really like to make. And I think young people, it's really great if they can think through some of those things as part of the process of what they're doing with whatever it is that they're passionate about and they want to change. And that will help them to actually get the impact that they want and hopefully make change happen a little faster. So, yeah.
Fantastic, Sue. Thanks so much. A couple things you touched on there, and I'm just curious to follow up a little bit. And we even have a question from the audience as well. I think one of the things, how do you make youth voice happen? How do you make sure it's used in programs and policy? I think is one of the challenges. And Pat touched on it a little bit, but there's a question here from Emmanuel that says, most times cultural context affects how youth assert themselves and impact society. What approach would you use to motivate youth to find themselves, motivate youth who find themselves in cultures that do not allow them to positively impact their society? I know you've done work all over the world and engage youth in all kinds of settings. Any thoughts on that?
It's a really huge barrier because young people are often dismissed as not knowing anything about the topic technically, like they don't have the training or they don't have the evidence, or they just don't know how, or they're dismissed as people who don't know how to engage in policy dialogue. So this is where the skills building and the training really comes in important, and also that collaboration. If, and you mentioned Greta Thunberg before, and if you think about, if she was just one person working in isolation and standing out there protesting, she wouldn't have nearly as much impact. But you look at it when she's joined by 10 people and then 50 people and all these other people online. So I think that one of the advantages that young people really have that they could use for this is social media. And this is a way to generate this kind of bigger impact and, get a more voice behind it. But so that's one thing, but I think really using those partners and the opportunities when it comes down to the UN or USAID or big NGOs, they often have more power to reach out to policymakers than the youth do themselves. So coming to them and trying to be involved in initiatives with them as partners also has that advantage that they can help to bridge the gap. So, I think there's not one solution. I really think you need to think through each situation and look for the opportunities and probe where it might be for each situation.
No, that's great, Stuart. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've seen through your work and Pat's work and others here, I think part of the original ideas of a lot of the youth voice work that all of you have done was that it's a lot harder to dismiss people if they come to the table with some data. It's very hard for whoever to say that they're not in the real world, they're uninformed or whatever else. And I think that's key. But then the two other points you mentioned, I think are dead on in terms of, by doing all this stuff, by having their own story to tell, their own data, if people don't want to listen, they can go around them or through them, through social media, through other things. And I think there's ways there. The last thing I would say I found is that I've been pleasantly surprised by politicians and program designers and others who actually were fascinated by the research that you put together. by the stories they were telling and the clarity of it. And very often we're lacking in that information themselves, and we're delighted to have something to use to move forward on these things. So I think all those are great. I'm sure the questions will keep coming back, because that is probably one of the biggest concerns and other aspects of things. So in the sake of time here, thank you again, Sue. That was brilliant. Let me move on to Kayla, who Pat and Sue have just talked about the scholarship and the research and the program side of it. Kayla's been involved in many aspects, but one is the actual delivery and designing of this, but also has done an enormous amount of research very recently about the outcomes of this and the process of this. And so Kayla, why don't you tell us a bit about all this?
Sure. So I want to actually follow up with a little bit about what Sue was just mentioning on that motivation aspect. And it's been mentioned by Pat and by Mark, and will continue to be mentioned, is this connection to how you can actually, how a young person, wherever they're located, can actually raise their voice and have it heard. And one of the avenues is through policy. And so Sue really mentioned that connecting point, and programs like Youth as Researchers, where you have a bridge that allows youth work to be then shared with policy and policy advocates. So that's one of the methods. But then the other one that Pat mentioned, and I think might be more, or might have the potential of having a stronger hold for Emmanuel, would be this element of social media and creating videos. And so when you're sharing information, you're sharing youth voice, you can do it in a very formal and expected way. And that's creating fact sheets, that's policy dialogues, that's webinars with USAID. And those are really important and impactful, but you don't always have the opportunity for that. And so when you don't have that capacity, ways to go about engaging your peers and creating your single voice to creating 10 to 50 to 100 can be through social media. And you can still use the same method, collecting data and research, because it's a lot harder to argue with numbers than it is with opinions. But the way you go about sharing them, as Pat had mentioned, can be done through videos and much more tangible or much more digestible approaches. And so I think that's something else to kind of keep in mind in that motivation, and how to have your voice heard when perhaps the audience doesn't want to listen to it. And so when thinking about kind of the more applicable youth voice elements, I've been on the ground. I've conducted the Youth Researchers Program in inner city Philadelphia in the US, out to Hanoi, working with the population across Vietnam. And then, of course, with everyone spoken so far with this larger COVID project, where we have, as Sue had mentioned, there are 92 countries that originally applied, over 5,000 individuals representing 92 countries. And so it's a massive blown up project that can be done on this very global scale, addressing this global issue, or it can, as I mentioned with the Philadelphia group, involve 5 or 6 17-year-olds that are worried about their inner city block. And that's one of the things that I really like about this program, is that flexibility to address whatever issue is at hand that needs to be addressed, whether it's small scale or large scale. One of the things that I wanted to make sure I mentioned in talking about youth voice actually goes to a point that Jane had mentioned at the very beginning, when she was talking about one of her favorite words of association for youth is to engage. And the piece that I would add to that is to engage authentically. And so if you're going to have these elements of collaboration, people working together, raising youth voice at the policy level, at the street level, you need to have all of the parties involved to be authentic. Take a look at the panel today. There are a whole bunch of doctors who've spent years studying, and they're in ivory towers and they're doing amazing work, but they're not on the ground. No matter what I do, I cannot be a 20-year-old in Zimbabwe right now. It is not something that I can do. It's not something that I can relate to. And so individuals, youth across the world, have so much power in your lived experiences. And it's important when thinking about these collaborations that everyone who is collaborating together at the table really works to understand the value that each voice can bring. And that's the approach, positive youth development, that takes that approach in the academic realm as well as in the applied realm. See my notes here. I also wanted to mention with youth voice this element of logistics. So you've got the theoretical approach where you're engaging authentically with individuals. you're collaborating together, you're working on policy and social media posts, but you also have to think about those logistics. How are people able to connect up? This past year, we've had, a global pandemic. So being mindful of physical health safeties as well as capacity to connect through internet, whether you're going to be on computers or through hotspots on your phone. These things might seem like small pieces that can be overlooked in actual on-the-ground trainings, but if you don't address these elements, then you're not able to actually get to the heart where youth can work and collaborate together with the different parties needed. So those are my quick comments on youth voice. And Mark had also mentioned some research that I've been doing. So when we started this Youth as Researchers COVID project with Sue, Mark, and Pat taking the lead with it, in a very short period of time, we had over 5,000 individuals apply. They represented 92 countries, and they were highly motivated to participate in some capacity to add their voice to working with this pandemic. And some of the research that I've recently completed was actually sending out a survey and asking those individuals what their motivation was. Some of their findings were really interesting. They broke down into kind of three main components. The top one, which I know Pat will very much appreciate, is this idea around empathy. Individuals were highly motivated to participate in this project because of empathy. They had empathetic concern, and they were very curious about others' perspectives on this project, as well as just this chance to work and engage with other people who might not be quite like them. And I think that's a really important piece because that speaks back to our focus around collaboration. You might have different levels of people coming from different hierarchies working together, but you also have different cultures, whether you're talking about in the same country, but city versus urban, or if you're talking about North America versus Southeast Asia. People being interested and willing to work together, I think, is a huge element in how to engage people in this kind of work. One of the other pieces is an element of autonomy. If you're creating a program where you're trying to engage in youth voice, ensuring that there is authentic choice for young people. In the Youth as Researchers program, as an example, individuals who participate in the program select the topic, the methods, the data collection, they analyze it. They are in charge of every element of the project. That element of choice is really, really impactful because it allows them to have ownership over what decisions they're making. And then the final piece that I think is really interesting, and as Sue had talked about, in order to collect data and raise your voice in that capacity, you have to build skills. And the third kind of component of motivation to joining the project was centered around competency and this capacity to actually receive critical feedback on skills so that there can be genuine improvement in those skills and they can be applied beyond the program. And so I think those are just some of the pieces that were relevant within our own work. They add some numbers, they add some data to how this program operates. And then they also allow some potential for creating new programs that are very similar in thread.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kayla. That's absolutely dead on with all of this. And I think this, as you touched on there, the idea of empathy and compassion and other things. I think that's part of this framework too. A lot of people might hear that and say, well, that's got to be incredibly far removed away from rural development or agricultural development or job creation. Again, I think it's a really key important thing to think about, is that young people are on the ground and they know what to care about in many ways. Maybe more so than a lot of us who put on blinders or are too old or whatever. I don't know. I keep thinking of the 1960s thing of don't trust anyone over 30. Maybe there was a bit of truth and magic to that. But I think the idea there is that youth embrace the issues and the challenges they're seeing. And I think that they very much want to address those, not just for a financial reason or security reason, but for a moral and ethical reason. And to harness that energy, that information, that passion is just remarkable. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in, but what I thought I would do, I will catch up on those. But I thought I would hand over now to keep you on the spot here for a little bit, Kayla, but also over to Lillian. Lillian's been one of our rock stars of youth voice and using it in many, many ways, and has been a driving force with this. She and Kayla have worked together really extensively on a lot of different things. So I thought I would just hand it over to the two of you, and you can maybe the two of you can tell your story. And in the meantime, I'll catch up on all the questions that are popping in. That'll come back to both of you in a second. So.
Sounds great, Mark. Thank you.
Sure.
So as a quick kind of setting of the scene, Lillian is one of our youth researchers. She'll share a little bit about herself, but she's worked with me in our North American region. And so I've acted as a coordinator with her, assisting her group very, very slightly, because they've definitely been at the leadership of this team. But Lillian, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and maybe your group's project?
Yeah, sure, for sure. So hi everyone, my name is Lillian. I'm super excited to be here today, and thank you, Kayla, for the introduction. So as she said, I'm currently a sophomore student, undergraduate student, majoring in cognitive science and statistics. And as she said, I was a member of the North American team in the USAID Researchers Program, where I focused primarily on data collection and analysis because of my stats background. And yeah, as she said, that's how I got to know her. She was one of the coordinators of the program. She checked in with us and gave us feedback whenever we needed help, which was really helpful. So I was really excited to hop on stage and share with you anything that you're curious about in regards to the YASLA program and my experience with it.
Wonderful, Lillian. You've done a great job throughout your work with your teammates on representing the different skills that people can add when they're working in a collaborative setting. And so you certainly were able to add your voice in issues and kind of commentary and what you guys wanted to study as part of your group. But you also have that wonderful stats background, and statistics can be a little scary. And so I think your group is very grateful to have your perspective on there. And then conversely, I remember having conversations with you about the capacity of this program allowing you to apply those skills and adjust them for this particular programmatic setting. Why don't you share with us your group's topic, what they decided to take a look at, and maybe how that decision came into play?
Right, for sure. So first of all, I actually kind of wanted to talk about my team because they make up like a really big part of the experience. So as a member of the North American team, I was working alongside 6 other girls, most of us in university, but one already working. Our team actually started off with more people, but as the program length was prolonged, because the program was just so new and COVID was happening, some of them just had to go and dedicate their time to other things. It was both really unfortunate, but also kind of a blessing in disguise because it was just much easier to find a time to meet and just work together when we have a smaller team. So each of us had really unique interests and backgrounds, which made it kind of hard when we were trying to narrow down to just one research topic. But when we finally got started with the project, the different perspectives that we had definitely came in handy. So the research topic that we chose to pursue was youth access to information about COVID-19 and its potential influences on behavior and well-being. So in the age of rampant false news, we were really curious about where our youths were getting their information and how they felt about the information that they got from these sources. So after completing the initial YR training modules, we started with the research immediately. So just to be short and to kind of update you on what our findings were, is that we found that social media, as Kayla has also already mentioned, social media was the most popular news source that youth consulted for COVID-related information. And in fact, over 70% of our survey respondents ranked social media as their top news source. And in addition to that, when we asked them what news sources they perceive as the most trustworthy, the top responses was also verified social media accounts. And these were really insightful findings because it allowed us to rethink how our trusted organizations and governments should reach the youth. And we were able to recommend that recommend the expansion of social media presence when orgs are hoping to communicate critical information to young people, and encourage organizations and governments to work with tech experts to create innovative and interactive online platforms for young people to share information and connect. So it was definitely a really fruitful research experience for all of us. And what is even better is that while we're doing this meaningful work, we had a great time getting to know each other and just getting to know other youths in this time of social isolation.
Lillian, that's such a fabulous response. I think we should just blast your response out there. Is what you've shared is the element of the process of this particular program, which is a piece that goes to our collaboration components, working with different people across the globe. This was the North American team. It consisted of 2 different countries. Individuals within both of those countries actually hailed from other areas of the world as well. And so we had a lot of different perspectives, experiences going into that collaboration. And I love that you mentioned the process and this capacity to work with other like-minded individuals. And then you had this beautiful example of using the data that you actually worked on to support this notion that if you want to engage in this particular case with authentic news and actually share fact-based information, a way to reach young people to do so is through social media. And that was both an inkling that you guys had, but now that can be supported by the data that you actually collected and shared both through social media, as well as with some other policy capacities. One last question, I think, for you before we run out of time would be, what do you think some of the future, both for you coming out of this program, but how do you see this program or others like it? I don't want to have too much a focus just on youth as researchers, but this element of collaborating youth using data to raise their voice, how do you see that as impactful in the future?
Right, definitely. So from a personal perspective, just like for me, participating in this program really allowed me to put my skills and passion into the work, and it actually inspired me to continue pursuing research for the rest of my undergraduate career. So I'm super grateful that I got to meet amazing people on my team, as well as scholars like you, Kayla, who really care about empowering and involving youth in advocacy work. So with almost a year of working together with the team, I found myself learning much more than I expected. And so it was just a really rewarding experience, and also a really empowering experience to see the final product come together step by step. And so in the future for this program, I think it has a lot of potential in becoming a great venue for youth voice globally. So I know that although it's postponed, all of the YAR teams get to present their research to really important and impactful policymakers. And this forum is where the direct conversation happens between youth and people who want to and can make youth voices heard. So that's definitely one thing that I'm really excited about. And yeah.
All right, that was fantastic. Great, thanks so much, Lynn and Kayla. Again, you're both rock stars with this. You're amazing, and the scope and the impact of your work has been remarkable. And to follow up on one thing that that Lillian said there, one of the things we've seen from a lot of the groups we've worked with is, you know, there tends to be people are very proud of the research they're doing and the stories they're telling. So much so that there doesn't tend to be the turf issues that you would see in, you know, other research settings. Youth are very, very happy to share their findings, their data, everything with each other across the globe to make all sorts of things happen. Now, what I would like to do here is move on in just in a couple of minutes here to Simon and Gina, who really heavily have focused on agriculture and how this all of this youth voice and other things fit into it. But there's two quick questions, and I just would like to raise them just briefly, maybe for well, for anyone, particularly Pat and Sue and Kayla. And this is the first one's a bit of a processing, and I think this is a really important one to address. Question says, can you speak to the heterogeneity of who applies, who does not apply to the program, and the implications? I know that's been a long time concern and issue with Pat and I in lots of different settings. You know, this is designed to empower youth voice, but what voices do and don't get heard. So if you guys could just maybe talk to that and how you've tried to make sure that things were addressed in the right way.
I can come in on that if you want, Mark. I think.
Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's a great question, and it raises, particularly from the point of view of UNESCO, and it raises and USAID indeed, it raises a major question about basically who's in the loop and who's not in the loop, and whose voice is heard, you know, whose voice or whose corner is heard, for want of a better term. And I think one of the issues around this is not least that we don't expect things like cultural competence or lack of cultural competence or lack of cultural context to in any way stop youth from having their voice heard or being researchers. And it shouldn't only be, that was the point I was trying to make earlier, that I think it shouldn't only be about youth who experience adversity, who are the youth researchers. I think it's a wider research community of youth. It's collaboration, as Sue said, and Kayla indeed, but also it's about enabling an opportunity that it's an open door system and that people know it's there and it's available to them. The question of capacity to do it is a different question that lies within universities and other agencies who complete the research or who complete the projects. But in terms of access, it should be literally by word of mouth or by word of email, by total open application.
If I can add something to that as well, we're a bit biased in that we're researchers, but one of the beauty of the work that we were able to conduct with this large COVID project is getting to some extent an understanding of who did apply. So we know how many people were applied to the program. We're well over 5,000. They came from 92 different countries. We have a few other demographic pieces, but that starts to help shape an idea of who is applying. And then follow-up kind of conversations and figuring out what gaps are then missing are kind of follow-up pieces. But I think having that capacity to understand openly and accurately who it is that you are researching, so you can then identify the gaps, I think can also help impact who's going to be at the table and what capacity they can participate in. And that also goes, I think it's actually a question in the Q&A, towards access. Our COVID-19 iteration of this program was completely conducted online for safety purposes, which means that if an individual is in an area that does not have access to the internet, they are going to be one of the individuals that would have missed out on the opportunity. And I think being able to acknowledge who is present and therefore who is missing can help to address some of those pieces.
That's great. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add on that, Kayla, I think that's a great point. And even in terms of, you know, in the early days, in Ireland and Mark, in the initial days with the US, you know, one of the issues that rose was around people, for example, living with intellectual disability and how they can be included. You know, so I think sometimes by default you get marginalization with this, but it's not intended. It's more to do with logistics and capacity. But in principle, as Sue will attest, we were, you know, it's very much about trying to make this available to as many people in as many contexts as we possibly can.
And the one thing I would add too is that, you know, we've talked a bit here, a good amount, about how we did this globally during the pandemic and everything else. But the vast majority of programs before this, actually all the programs before this, were done on the ground individually with different groups. And I think there was two findings that I felt. One was on the one side, I found youth to be incredibly open and inclusive, and wanted to make sure that people of all different backgrounds were included. Most of the programs they've done have really had a social justice spin to them, whether it's something as clearly defined as Pat mentioned with LGBTQ youth, to others who have been just focusing on local economic development, food security at universities and things like that. So they've been, from the start, that's sort of been an issue for them to make sure things were inclusive. The other thing is that, many of us here, in addition to many hats we wear, have a community development background. And with that work, one of the opening questions always is who's missing from the table and how do we get them there? So there's been those kind of things as well. And we can certainly talk more about those. One other quick question, and then we'll move on to Simon and Gina. And this is a great question because all these things always come down to resources and money and everything else. So the question says, interested to know the role of local organizations in scaling and sustaining over time. Youth-led research in the agri-food sector, or sustaining over time in the youth research in the agri-food sector. Examples of universities or private research organizations or other stakeholders that are funding or implementing youth-led research. What did it take to get there? And that's absolutely a brilliant question. There's one thing I will throw in to start, but I think, if anyone who's spoken so far can chime in on this, it'd be great, because the funding and scaling is obviously an issue. The one thing that did actually come up in our work, or one of the good, if there was a good side to the pandemic, is that we had to move very fast, and instead of doing individual trainings on the ground face to face, Kayla and others worked very hard to digitize all this, to put all the trainings into videos and everything else so it could be distributed immediately globally. that in the future will cut down on any cost. But still, there's more to it. So I don't know if Sue or Kayla or Pat or anyone else has any thoughts on that. How do you make this sustainable? How do you scale this? Who pays the bills for it, I guess. So
yeah, I can maybe start, Mark. I think it's absolutely necessary to have local partners to sustain this type of initiative. And this is not only, we're actually partnering with a number of different organizations, because when we were so rapidly scaled this up, of course, there was about 6 or 7 of us in the initial group discussing how we do this project. And we've got 34 research teams, and there's no way that we could have looked after all of them. So we did partner with some local universities, some NGOs and others. Our training platform, for example, is provided by an NGO partner. So this is really important in terms of not only being able to connect with the youth in different countries and have people that knew a little bit about the local situation on the ground. So for example, in the Philippines, because we had a lot of applicants, or Pakistan, we have partnered with somebody in that country that can help to support them. And they know about some of the issues they might also face with access to information or conducting research. And then in terms of sustaining this and building this into something longer term, this is something where agencies like the UN are not so strong. And this is where those local partnerships on the ground are really important. So we actually have been open to those partnerships and trying to bring in as many people. But of course, finding us is still an issue. And then we still need to strengthen and develop this network in the longer term.
great, thanks, Sue. Yeah, I think it's very important to have these local connections with NGOs, universities, others, but also at the same time, I think it's a very dynamic thing that can be partnered in with lots of different local organizations. Many of these things have been national focus, regional focus, global focus, but the vast majority have been locally focused. So linking in with everything from civic to religious to other groups, the list goes on of any partners to have there. So in many ways, it's a community development framework, as well as you know, a broader kind of youth voice initiative. So, but yes, we can certainly talk more about that. But so in the sake of time here, I just really want to move on to Simon and Gina. Their work ties all this together, in my opinion. They've done some just amazing work over the last decade, and I was first exposed to their work in some work that UNESCO did with the International Fund for Ag and Development, looking at kind of this big umbrella of ag life for youth, with farm transition, with agricultural innovation, with value-added employment that youth design and other things. And then there's many layers, I think, where this opportunity for youth voice falls in, and also links in with education and family literacy and a whole series of things. So with that quick intro there, so let me hand over to Simon and then to Gina to talk more about their work and the actual implementation of this in practice.
Thank you very much. Oh. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm Simon from Malawi, and Malawi is in Southern Africa. We have a population of about 18 million, and the majority are the youth. And I think from the chart that you brought in, we have a very young population, 16.3, which is quite young. We also have issues with high unemployment, and the majority are the youth. The study that we conducted as part of UNESCO Chair Coordinating Team is on intergenerational learning. We focus on 2 rural areas where we wanted to find out how knowledge transfers from the older generations to the youth. So basically, we am going to look at 3 areas. In which areas do we see knowledge being transferred from elders to the youth, and the models of learning. And finally, I'll also look at some of the implications. In the areas that we went in, we found that there was a lot of knowledge transfer between old people or those who are adults to young people. And we have like in rice farming, fish farming, and also wood carving, mushroom gathering, and beekeeping, and as well as mat making. What was interesting is that the mode of learning was that young people were more or less attached to those who knew a little more about the trade. For example, in rice farming, the young boy or girl would work together with the parents in the field, and as they are working together, the parents would advise the young person how to do certain activities. So it's learning by doing, and it was quite effective. But what we noted again is that this type of learning, we see an interface of two systems. Some of the knowledge is quite indigenous, that was being passed on, but at the same time is the knowledge that is obtained through formal education. So we see the interaction of two knowledge systems through these learning processes. And basically they're acquiring these knowledge for a livelihood with the knowledge that they're acquiring, that is in a way maybe contributing to reducing unemployment, but at the same time empowering them with the skills that they need to survive in their respective communities. And for us, when we looked at some of the issues that arose from this, we find that the activities that they were involved in, they were those that the environment could support. Like for rice, they have good land that is suitable for rice. Fishing, we have the lake around where children or indeed the parents would inculcate the knowledge to the young ones in this area. So the economic activities were quite aligned to what the environment would support. We also saw active tree planting, and the season closes. It's a time when they would want to give an opportunity to fish to breed so that they should be allowed to grow without disturbance. So for us, we saw this as quite interesting, that we see young people participating in the conservation of the environment. But I think more related to what we are going through here is the fact that this knowledge is not documented. And we think that the youth should be able to document this knowledge so that it's not easily forgotten. And we also think that in terms of the school's curriculum, it's important that this knowledge, which is passed on from adults to young people, should be in the school curriculum, should be placed in the school curriculum so that it is taught formally. So by and large, we see in the two communities that we looked at attempts by communities to empower the youth in the economic sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'll move on to Gina here in just one second. But I think that's one of the key things that we've seen through a lot of research and a lot of discussion is, we've talked here about youth research and other things, but that can take many forms. And one of them that we've seen some wonderful examples, and certainly the ones you just have highlighted, this ability for intergenerational transfer of knowledge, and the ability for that to be learned and transferred, both casually, just through interacting with people, elders and others, but also very systematically. And I think your ideas of embedding this in schools and other things where young people actually, interview, do whatever form it takes to document, indigenous practices, the wealth of knowledge that's been gained over generations, just incredibly powerful. And I think also allows for very quick innovation, quick adaptation, and it's also very culturally relevant and everything that goes with that. So it's absolutely brilliant. So thank you. So I'll hand over to Gina now, and then we can have some more discussion.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good evening from the Philippines. I would like to share with you our project in a rural community in Nueva Ecija here in the Philippines. It is in the northern part of the country, and it is considered as the rice granary of the Philippines. So this initiative implements cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary community-based adult literacy and intergenerational learning programs, like what Simon now mentioned. So these learning programs facilitate sustainable livelihoods, organic farming practices, and information system in rural communities. So basically, the project that we are involved in, and the youth who are involved in this project, and the context is in the context of organic farming. Those who are involved in this study are the out-of-school youth who are taking up organic agriculture in a vocational training center, and most of them are children of farmers. The second group who is involved in the study is composed of mostly women farmers, and due to economic restrictions, they often experience social, cultural, and political exclusion. So this project is multi-sectoral in the sense that it involves collaboration among social actors, such as academic institutions, like my university, partnering with other colleges and training centers in the rural area, and research centers as well. So we also have partnership with local government units, such as the mayor's office and the barangay or village. And we also have linkages with government agencies, such as the Department of Social Welfare and Development and the Department of Agriculture. We also work with business firms, so their support is really crucial in this project. The NGOs and funders as well. And at the center of all this is our target community. So there are two sub-projects that we intend to implement as well. So first is the establishment of a farm family school, which is educational unit. So that will be established also in the rural area. And that would offer secondary and post-secondary level of education where children of Filipino farmers engage in training with their parents, helping them in theoretical and practical methods so as to instill in them values and a sense of commitment in the performance of work. So this is crucial, the religious dimension, because we are, I think, the only Catholic nation in Asia. So the second target is to establish a farm business unit, which is dedicated on and focused on training of the youth as farm managers and farm entrepreneurs. So the degree that will be offered would lead to a Bachelor of Science in Entrepreneurial Management, major in farm business. So in the barangay or village, women farmers participate in capacity building activities, and we target their leadership potentials and project management skills, and also their existing information literacies and their research skills, because we would like to have them as farmer researchers. And in these activities, we have the help of the youth. They are helping us in cascading the project in the village, particularly in the aspect of the project, which entails integration of information and communication technology. So we are really maximizing the young people are really brilliant when it comes to the utilization of technology. So we are really tapping into this talents and capacities of the youth. The youth and women farmers also engage in experimentation. So this entails laboratory testing of soil, water, and production of organic concoctions. Another aspect which I find really useful are trainings on building resilience to disasters and climate change. We experience a lot of natural disasters here in the Philippines. At this very moment, we are experiencing a typhoon, and I hope the electricity will cooperate. No? We also have capacity building activities which involve preparation of business plans and training on financial literacy, marketing, and e-commerce. We promote eco-enterprise that operates within sustainability framework. So this entails reducing environmental impacts of their operation and integrating social responsibilities. Since the training center, also our partner training center in the rural area also serves as the farm hub or farm laboratory, the students assist in the training of the members of the people's organization, because these women farmers have formed an association which is now legally recognized by the government. So these small steps that these groups are taking can already be considered as huge achievements, as this is a form of empowerment and honing of their leadership skills, their sense of identity, commitment, and participation. So we also utilize farming technology, and this is a very important and very interesting aspect of the project. We created a mobile app for agriculture and online learning management system, like what Simon mentioned. It's really an issue, how we store, how we preserve, especially indigenous and traditional knowledge. So what we did was to create a mobile applications for the students. So here, not only the youth who are enrolled in organic farming course are involved, but also the family members of our women farmer participants. But due to the current health crisis, wherein students and trainers mobilization is restricted by quarantine protocols, we started establishing a digital mobile campus, or DMC. So this is a platform that would render free, quality, and accessible learning opportunities, both for the youth and for the adults. So with that, this project, we believe that it leverages communities through the optimization of information and mobile technology and its integration into community development. So we are really hoping that through this project, we would be able to encourage the youth not to engage in agriculture and intergenerational learning, because we have to make agriculture exciting for them as well. And we hope that this would contribute to the creation of a more sustainable system and sustainable futures for them. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Gina. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And then the scope and the impact of the work you're doing is just remarkable, that it accounts for so many aspects of all this, from youth to intergenerational to gender equity to the whole package, which is just remarkable, and then connects in as well to broader community development just beyond agriculture. Just amazing. So instead of asking you some questions, there's a bunch of them here that are coming in, and maybe we can open up to all of our panels here. We've got about 10 minutes until we need to start wrapping everything up. But there's some questions from Jane. Jane, would you like to ask any of the ones you posted here? I can read them out as well. But
oh gosh, maybe it's better if you read something that you think might be of interest. But I have really been enjoying the rich discussions and presentations. Thank you so much. Maybe on the latest one, I was thinking in that context, which sounds so comprehensive and amazing, a little bit about scale and also the involvement of other market actors towards sort of sustainability and sense of shared value in the market. Were buyers involved? Are they investing in the education? Is the app self-sustaining in the end? Because we know a lot about digital technologies. There's a lot of supply-driven approaches that aren't necessarily uptaken, including by young people. So in this case, I was just wondering about the context for that as well. Thank you.
great. Any thoughts on that? I guess particularly Gina, in terms of your work.
Yeah, I think the question is also in the chat box. No, it's about the buyers. Are they involved about the app? Are the youth involved in the design? Like what I mentioned, the support of the business industry is also is really crucial. So what we did was actually before they engage both youth and the women farmers and the adults, no, before they started their livelihood, we had a sort of feasibility study, and it is where multi-sectoral collaboration is really needed, and that is key. And that's where the researchers are also needed. So it is interdisciplinary. So we also involve our colleagues from our university who are involved, who are from the College of Business. So we help the adults and the youth to identify the needs in the market. So what they did was to ask the hotels, the schools around the village. They asked them about what their needs, and then what they did was to produce organic chicken, and also the vegetables that they planted. They scheduled. We divided the project, the reach of the project into several zones. So one zone is, let's say, planting one type of crop, let's say squash, the other one is planting eggplant. So they are not competing, so they are collaborating as well. In terms of mobile application that we created, since the youth, they have limitations in terms of learning that's specialized, because that is specialized skill that they have to learn in terms of the integration of technology. So we collaborated with the ICT department of our university, and we involved the youth in terms of content, not only the youth, but also the women farmers. So this is intergenerational, and we also value indigenous knowledge and the traditional practices. So we have them as co-authors. So they identify, and they write the content, and we just intervene. Our role is just to polish, in terms of design. In those processes, both the youth and women farmers are involved, and then we consult them. So there's an open dialogue among these key players.
Brilliant. All right, thanks so much. Probably time for one or two more questions here. And another one kind of harkens back to the question we had before about inclusion. And I'm just curious what people think. That the question says, a challenge we are facing in our sectoral approaches is how to integrate our programming that multiple intersections with multiple intersecting realities facing and shaping young people. So for example, even if we succeed in creating program, youth might not be able to take them. Things like gender inequity, gender balances, gender obstacles, other things like that. Any thoughts on how any of you have overcome these kind of things? Because that is something we run into, all of us, as we develop programs. The program may be perfect, but it may not be able to be used or adopted by the audience we want.
I think, Mark, if I want to come in on that, I think this comes up a lot around, and even the whole kind of theory around intersectionality. And it's funny, I heard a really brilliant podcast by Kimberly Crenshaw lately enough, reflecting on 30 years after she kind of invented or developed the concept of intersectionality, that, and it strikes me as a big issue that has occurred for youth as researchers, but also in the context of food security, is the issue of timing and time. And that there are, for many young people, there may be multiple stresses in their community, in their family, in their lives that impact on their own security, and not just in food security terms, that really impinge on them engaging. And similarly, in civic society, if you take something as horrific as we've all been through and are going through the pandemic, how we adjust, respond to that, live with that, it determines how we can even approach other things and other facets. So one of the historical problems we have around young people's voice in policy across any area has been the context in which that voice has been raised. And it's pretty sad to say that very often it takes a crisis. It has to be some amazing or outstanding crisis that enables voice to be heard. We shouldn't be waiting for those situations. And I think that strikes me as an important facet in this, that it's purely to do with context and capacity are two key issues.
No, I agree completely. Thanks, Pat. That's spot on. One other question here, and I think we have time for one more. And this is more directed at your work, Simon, but it probably is similar to the things everyone else has encountered too. So everyone feel free to chime in. But the question was, do you see any occasions where new knowledge that was transferred by youth to adults, and how that was, and including where youth have success in convincing power holders using this new knowledge? Any thoughts on that, or any experiences about how that worked or played out?
Thank you very much. As we pointed out, this was an ethnographic study, and we're able to, like in the rice farming, we're able to participate, and we could see youth also participating, and there was the conversation that was taking place between the adults and the young people. And again, when we went for rice, what you call mushroom gathering up hills, and there was really a young person trying to show the mom, saying, look, is this a proper thing? And then the mom would advise. So we saw learning in action. And but far more related to your question, I think it's quite critical that knowledge be facilitated in this manner. And I've seen one who has suggested perhaps that it's important that this knowledge should not just be held orally, but be documented. And if we could have community information banks where knowledge about some practices, some economic activities could be stored in writing, and hence this would pass on from one generation to the other. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Simon. Yeah, and I think there's, as many of the things we've talked about, these all exist in the context of agricultural life, of rural communities, of food security, and everything else. But there's so many interrelated areas to all the things we've talked about that just providing the knowledge here is only a part of that. So this ability for well-being and other things to be connected across generations, the ability to not reinvent the wheel, to learn of the best practices from previous generations, and to weave in the newest ideas and opportunities. It's just fascinating. And I think there's so many things we can build on from all of this here. So I think we are just about at the point. Well, we are at the point now where we need to wrap up. What I would like to do, and Christy, you can feel free to start, but I can summarize some of the key take-home messages, and then we can take it from there.
Yep, please go ahead, Mark.
Sure. So there's an awful lot there in an hour and a half. We could have had an entire conference and seminar on this. It was amazing the work that everyone's doing. And just going through, my notes here from some of the big things, and I'm sure Christy has others that I've missed. I think the one of the key things is that youth have very, very good knowledge of the realities that are taking place in their world, and that they can critically, systematically study these and tell us how to address these problems. That I think is incredibly important. And I think, as Pat said, it's important that they not just be heard, but listened to, and that their information and their suggestions are acted upon. The information they're presenting, everything else, the ideas they have, they're just as valid, perhaps even more valid than the voices of many of us. I think the comments that Kayla and Pat touched on about this intersection of empathy, of pro-social caring is important. That we focus on that because it addresses many of the things we've talked about in the questions here about enabling marginalized groups to have their voice heard, whether they just be young people or they be different pockets of young people. And with that, I think it goes hand in hand with the issues that many of you have touched on in terms of gender equity and intersectionality, economic equity. Even if we get to the point where we create agricultural jobs and others, there's still inequity there based on gender and other things. And I think too, a few of you have mentioned this idea that, and this goes with empathy, is that there's a social responsibility that youth very clearly recognize. And this is a social and environmental one, that they see new and better agricultural practices, new opportunities for sustainability, better environmental behavior, So I think that comes in through a lot of this. Many others have mentioned here, both in the presentations and in the questions, that we need to make sure we create some structures for programmatic leaders and program and policy leaders for them to sincerely listen and take on the information that's provided to them by youth. Again, this can be impactful in many levels, strictly limited to ag production and anything like that, but can also be much broader in terms of taking the best of innovative knowledge, of traditional knowledge, and putting those into practice. And those are the kind of things that advance us. And I think that's a really key and important thing. So all of us as program and policy makers, and the program and policy makers we work with, we need to kind of clear the path a little bit so that youth can have their voices heard. And again, this isn't just opinion that they're giving. This is data supported and data-based findings. And it tells an importantly deep story that we may not have all the time. Touching on the last couple things here, I think are really important to mention. As Simon pointed out, and Gina, this intergenerational aspect is key. We often don't think about that. We think about ag employment or ag jobs within a family as being just a family farm, and it's a very clear pattern of farm transition or other things. That's often one of the most problematic things that forces people out of agriculture. So I think these youth voices and dialogues across generations is absolutely key. And also, as Simon pointed out, that the collecting of information from elders and others is vital in many ways, but it's also vital because it's a setting where youth and adults dialogue as equals. They share information about the places they hold dear and how they can sustain things there. So they do it as equals. And then I think, as Gina pointed out, that the collective growth, the opportunities for sharing information and education, sharing data, information, all sorts of things across the lifespan, across the family, build something, and especially at a community development standpoint, build something that's much stronger than just the sum of its parts. So I think those are some of the big things. I guess the last thing I would point out is, and this is what Gina hit on as well, that this free and open access to high impact research, to deeper understanding, whether it be new research or research that's been accumulated over a lifespan, goes beyond just building agriculture. It builds the capacity of the wider community. And there's enormous strength in numbers and creativity and innovation and social support and resilience and everything else that comes with that. And I think all the folks that talked today and the questions we've had kind of pulls all this together. There's many moving pieces, but it comes together, I think, in a very strong, kind of clear path forward for all this. So I can hand over to Christy. I'm sure there's a million things I missed. I was just getting excited by the whole thing and probably lost a lot of it. So.
No, not at all. But I did want, there were sort of two key things I think that I heard in today's session that I think are important for us in thinking as we go forward. One being, as Kayla pointed out, the key role of that research translation piece, making sure that the research and the messages that come out of it are clear, they're actionable, they're concrete, and they're not overwhelming. And so figuring out how to communicate the findings, how to prioritize those findings, the sequencing of what interventions might occur, is actually a pretty critical function in having youth engage effectively in policy and advocacy and governance activities within their communities and within their, and frankly, even within their households, right? As we look at those household enterprises and family farms and how they can move forward. Another is, there were, I guess, two others. One on what are those modes of communication at different levels? So making sure that we are attentive to those modes of communication and what that means for who's included and who's not. Ultimately, I think we still have lessons to learn about how to include those who perhaps are less educated, who have less access to internet, to mobile devices. And so I think those are things that we may need to continue to query and continue to work on as a community to figure out how to make sure we're not excluding and that we are being as inclusive as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so those were my thoughts on the session. Did anyone?
I would just throw in, and just two other things I was meaning to mention as well. I think that as we talk, the examples and things that Sue has mentioned were absolutely critical in terms of how do we put this into practice, both at the NGO level, but at the local level and other things. How do we create those structures where, very often our organizations, our universities, everything they operate in little pillars of things we do, and those pillars don't connect too often. I think that some of the things that Sue mentioned was really key about how we get there. I think we need to keep thinking of that sort of thing. The other thing too, and probably the most important thing of all this, we've talked a lot about youth voice. We've talked a lot about other things. As we develop programs, as we initiate these things, we have to make sure we actually talk to the people who are being impacted by these. And I think Lillian and Kayla talked to an awful lot of that. We've all seen things where we've had very good intentions of programs and engaged youth, and then we did what we decided was best and not consult them. They're the ones who are most directly impacted by this. They're the ones who are going to choose to adopt or not. And I think for us to have them continuously part of this process is critical, not just from the beginning idea of collecting data and information, but through the whole implementation and everything else. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I know it's late in the evening for Gina and Sue. We owe you dinner and drinks or whatever for that. Simon, it's the middle of the afternoon, I think, for you, so we need to make amends there, and the rest of you, and Pat as well. But thank all of you for this. I'll hand it over to Christy and Katie and others to do any last wrapping up. But I think this is wonderful, just amazing work, and I'm really humbled and amazed by what you're doing. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you all. We appreciate it. We are excited to continue the discussion. One of the issues that did come up here at the end today was on the use of ICT and how you engage with communications technology and what they can do with it. And that will be the topic of our our next convening, which is on Thursday. So we do invite you to join us for that one as well. That will be at 9:30. You can register from the same link that you had for this event. And before we close, I was just going to ask Jane if you had any final comments, and Katie, if there were any final words of closing that we need to share with the group.
Thank you all so much. Nothing else really to add. There's been so much rich sharing and learning today. I'm so grateful for it. And, I guess what I'm thinking also about are some of the central messages that came over and over about the importance of context, right? And the specific situations of diverse young people. And I also love, Dr. Lontok, your emphasis on the importance of an opportunity space, what I'll call an opportunity space, that, in a particular area, something will grow, right? And there are buyers for that, and there is knowledge to be shared, kind of thing. And contexts where maybe new things will be coming over the horizon, and the challenge is to move in new directions. Or let's say it's about diversification, et cetera. So I think what's been sparked in me especially too is just thinking about all of the diverse young people that come together with their individual contexts and experiences, whether it be then to bring that to a process, the research processes that you've noted, where they can see their own circumstances in wider social contexts. And, we may not always find similar circumstances across these contexts, but the process of young people being able to systematically ask questions about their world and find pathways to communication is one that I think you've laid out really clearly, a wide range of reasons why those are important and beneficial. So I think we have big challenges to think about how we can do this more regularly, invest in it, be intentional about it, and hopefully reap together with young people and their families and communities the rewards of that towards better development outcomes. And youth development outcomes. So thank you. Those are just a few parting comments on this side, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with all of you. Fantastic work, and thank you all so much again, and to the wonderful participants who've come today.
That's great. Thank you, Jane, and thanks everyone again. And as Jane said there, you know, we could have talked for days and hours on all this stuff. I like to see these things as just the beginning of a conversation. So for everyone who's connected and has great comments in the chat and everything else here, please don't be a stranger. Let's keep the discussions going, and there's many great things to come. So with that, I guess we're done, right, Katie?
Yes, I think we are done. Thank
right.
you all. And just a reminder that you, will be receiving a email with the recording and any slides. So be on the lookout for that within the next week.
Wonderful. And thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful day, and look forward to talking soon.